was Randolph Caldecott's connection to Farnham is somewhat tenuous. He was only in Broomfield for 4 years before he died. She came here, she studied at Farnham College of Art, only for 2 terms, but what she learnt there became the foundation of her technique. And then later she worked at the Camouflage Development and Training Centre in Farnham Castle, and that turned out to be crucially important for her. And what can you say of her? Well, I looked her up in a book on art, and I found this. The sense of energy and animation, a confident fluidity of line, a bold use of vibrant gem-like colours, and the subtle use of negative space. And Massimo asked me what I meant by negative space, so I had to go away last night and check. And I'll tell anybody who asks me afterwards, all right? But that's an assessment by a professional artist. And her standing in the pantheon of children's book illustration is high. The drawings change hands for 4-figure sums. Most of her Tolkien and Lewis works have remained continuously in print. The Narnia stories alone have sold more than 100 million copies. Her paintings were used in the Hollywood Narnia films. Anybody who's heard my talks knows I'm given to exaggeration, but if I could point out that her work has probably been seen by more people than the reproductions of Michelangelo. There can be very few artists who have affected the minds of children to the same degree as this woman. So, let's have a look at a few of these. Oh, she's also brought fame, incidentally, to the Heritage Open Days. This you'll recognise as the brochure, but Alberto sent me a link which reveals that in America, you'll find it on the Pauline Baynes website. So fame has spread to the States. Okay, let's have a quick look at her life. This is the jigsaw of her life. The same adaptation again. Just go through it quickly. She was born in Hove in 1922. She had an older beloved sister who was, I think, called Angela. And her father went out to India. He was the commissioner in Agra. When she was 5 years old, she came back, and she'd be very happy in India, incidentally. She had an ayah she loved very much. But the mother decided to come back with the daughters instead of staying with her husband. And she wrote to him a note that said, "I'm going back to England, you can do what you like." Which he proceeded to do, I have to say. The mother and the 2 daughters lived in hotels for a while around Farnham. Pauline Baynes had a highly unhappy time in a convent before going to a school where she was still a bit of a miscreant, but did rather better. She was incredibly precocious, and I think that was one of the things that the nuns found annoying. They thought she was arrogant, she was enormously clever, and obviously very capable. The father then came back from India. He returned to living with his wife, but he also brought back a mistress who lived nearby. And that was the way it was. For many years, Pauline had to look after her father, actually, like many daughters in those days, younger daughters. They gave many of the best years of their lives to looking after parents. And she, I mentioned, went to Farnham School of Art, but that was when she was 15. She then went to the Slade. She showed her first works in the Royal Academy at the age of 17 in 1939. And then she joined the Women's Voluntary Service because the war had broken out, and she was sent to the Camouflage Development and Training Centre in Farnham Castle. She met Tolkien in 1948, C.S. Lewis in 1949. She took Rockbarn Cottage in Dockenfield, and in 1961 she met the man she was to marry, Fritz Otto Gosch. She befriended Tolkien, Fritz, Tolkien, Shepard, the illustrator of the Winnie the Pooh books, and so on. They all used to go off to Brighton and places like that. They got on very well together. I think Tolkien and Tolkien would swap stories, war stories with Fritz. He was a German soldier. He'd been in the Royal Africa Corps. And then Fritz died in 1988, and she was mortified. I think she had something like a nervous breakdown. Her memory went she was alone, and then 5 years later discovered that she had a daughter, that Fritz had a daughter before the war, behind the Berlin Wall, and Alberto and his wife spent many years tracking down, because Alberto married the daughter, many years tracking down what had happened to the father. And in the end, after the access to Stasi files, after the coming down of the Berlin Wall, a kind of happy ending. And then after 15 or so happy years, she died in 2008. The whole picture of Pauline Baynes, and I will be very arrogant in saying I can give you one because people who knew her far better are here. She loved to sit at the window in her rock-bound cottage, listening to Handel, classical music, of course, and working right until the end of her life. This newspaper article I think is fascinating, and it's my one contribution to Pauline Baynes scholarship, right? This I found, Daily Mirror, 1936. And a letter reached me yesterday from the little girl you see in the picture here. Please listen to this. I'm awfully fond of London, Rossetti, Nelson, Rupert Brooke, St. George, the cinema, Millais' Ophelia, and Gerald Brockhurst. I'd love to preach your common sense religion, like it not mattering whether you go to church or not. God to me is everything, merely because he is so wonderful and knows me through and through. Also, he is gloriously beautiful. The writer of this letter is 13. Her name is Pauline Baynes, and she hopes one day to be as great an artist as the Rossetti, whose child on canvas she might so easily be. I want to congratulate her on the brilliant promise of her drawings. I want to tell her too, to go on refusing all other standards in life, except the ones that her own instinct dictates. She was a very precocious, very capable young lady, and she did go on to become a fine book illustrator. I must mention Farnham Castle. I discovered Pauline Baynes when I wrote a book on Farnham Castle, and I was desperate to find if there were any local artists who worked there, because there were lots of famous artists. Roland Penrose, Trevelyan, and other people worked here, but I discovered Pauline Baynes, and that's how I discovered Pauline Baynes, as an artist working at the Camouflage and Development Training Centre. And it was crucially important to her because another artist working there at the same time was a man called Powell Perry. And some of you may remember the Perry colour books. They're now collector's items. And what he did was to get some of the artists working there to moonlight as book illustrators for him. And I think I'm right in saying that Pauline's first publication originated in the connection she made at the Camouflage Development and Training Centre. So, showing examples of Pauline's work surrounded by this might seem unnecessary, but let me do it because I didn't have time to change my presentation. It won't take long. You can see here some of these beautiful presentations and the use of negative space, in addition to the focus, the positive image, her clever use of the white space again and again is, I think, what was meant by the use of negative space. That's the Tolkien reader. She produced the cover for a number of these books. Father Giles of Ham was the book that got her into Tolkien illustration. She didn't illustrate the big Lord of the Rings. She did some book illustrations and cover illustrations. She did all of the Lewis Narnia, all 7 Narnia books. And then she did these wonderful biblical or Christian depictions. That's St. Francis, obviously. I think that's an absolutely lovely image from Tales from the British Isles. And some of the works that I like best, and I tell you, if you have a close look at these, the detail is astonishing. Detail doesn't make great art, but it's incredibly compelling. I don't know how she did it. There are lines here that look as if they've been painted with the hair. You'll see what I mean if you have a look. And some of them are positively medieval in appearance. So, let's just have a look at a few of them. I just think that's glorious. That's the Nativity. It could almost be an illuminated manuscript. That's a Dickensian scene of Christmas. A totally different gift. That's an interesting mixture of the pre-Raphaelite and the medieval. She had mastered these techniques. Again, a modern illuminated manuscript, I think, is incredibly beautiful. A biblical depiction, you don't need me to explain what. And another illuminated manuscript type of illustration. And then what I think is a masterpiece, which is this map, which you'll see on one of these posters. It's not just a cartographic masterpiece. Bear in mind that Pauline Baynes, after Farnham Castle, worked for the Admiralty producing maps. She was a good cartographer. She was, I think, a master of colour, beautiful pastel shades, and she didn't just throw this map together. She did it in very close collaboration with Tolkien, who was a highly demanding individual. And I include this here simply to show you a real illuminated manuscript. So, The Guardian. Here's an article, which obviously you can't read, but the interesting bits here. Tolkien's annotated map of Middle-earth discovered inside a copy of Lord of the Rings. Goes on sale in Oxford for £60,000. And this is a portion of the map which Alberto kindly sent me. And what it reveals, if you look at it closely, is the annotations by Tolkien, the annotations by Pauline Baynes, as she worked towards satisfying his highly demanding requirements. As you can see, Tolkien himself copiously annotated in green ink and pencil, with Baynes adding her own notes. This is an interesting comment because the relationship between C.S. Lewis and Pauline Baynes was sometimes somewhat strained, and Tolkien himself, with whom he got on very well, was described as very uncooperative. He was a hard taskmaster. C.S. Lewis almost didn't seem to care less. After she produced the work, he said, "Oh, that's great, that's fine, that's wonderful." Tolkien was much more demanding. And somebody, he may be here, I saw leaving the meeting we had a couple of days ago, said it would be interesting to see what her work was like before she got the finished product. And the answer is, it reminds me a bit of a Beethoven sketchbook. When you look at it, you can't believe that anything ordered could have come out of it. But anyway, this is an example of her work in progress. So, I'm getting fairly near to the end, so don't worry, I just do feel I need to tell you something about her stay in Dockenfield. She lived in Rockbarn Cottage. This is the 1871 Ordnance Survey map. Rockbarn Cottage, look at that. It's a tiny little cottage, 2 bedrooms, a farm labourer's cottage, and in 1871 there appeared to be a farm or farmstead next to it. If you look at it today, it bears no relationship at all. The farm has gone and there's some other building there. This is entirely new, and the cottage is just subsumed into that part of the building. These are just a few images that Alberto kindly gave me. That actually shows the cottage as it was when Pauline Baynes lived there. And there you can see the aerial photograph of the plot in which Fritz produced a beautiful garden for his wife. And there's a lovely photograph of Fritz and Pauline Baynes. Fritz, as I say, had been a prisoner of war. He was in the Royal Africa Corps. According to what I read, he was captured, he was sent to America. The Americans sent him back to England as a prisoner of war, and he had a first wife, He didn't know what had happened to her. She was behind the Iron Curtain, and he decided to make a home in England. He went doing odd jobs and was a dog meat salesman when he met Pauline. It is the most extraordinary story, very romantic. And they had 20 happy years together, or thereabouts. And now I have to admit a terrible mistake, Alberto, terrible mistake. When I first was putting this presentation together, I never met Alberto, and I was going to tell you that this was Fritz, the husband. And I have to say, when I looked at it again, I thought, hold on a moment, I've seen this man. That's not Fritz. So, this isn't Fritz. They had a happy domestic life together, and then there was an article in the Observer in about 1961, and the article, I can't memorise everything unfortunately, but the article said, "Forgotten illustrator for the Chronicles of Narnia finds fame at last." And that began, in this country, a little bit of a renaissance of interest in her work, because she'd become a bit neglected. And then in the 2002 Who's Who of Important Women, she gets a very extensive and honourable mention. She also was capable of working on the largest possible scale. I mentioned Michelangelo. I won't make extensive claims, but she produced the largest cruel tapestry ever in the world. Now, she didn't actually embroider it. She produced a cartoon, a bit like Raphael would have produced a cartoon and left other people to do the embroidery. It's 25 feet by 15 feet, and it was purchased by the church in Minneapolis. And it took the good ladies of the congregation of Minneapolis Church 40 years to complete the embroidery, and they did it in 2010. And then, this is the Worm in the Rose, beautiful, beautiful tapestry erected at the end of their church. They were so proud of it. And then, shortly afterwards, this is an article I've got from an American newspaper. Minneapolis church is split over a tapestry made by its women that some call insensitive. And guess what? She includes in the tapestries some frontiersmen and what used to be called in her day Red Indians. And this apparently has deeply upset and offended and pained people, so it's now been taken down. These are three characters. Ernest Shepherd, I must say, sorry, they got somebody's eye there. Ernest Shepherd, who I have to say was much nicer than he looks. I mean, he looks like my old headmaster. I feel frightened looking at him. But he was a very nice man, and he thought Pauline Baynes' work tremendous, and he was a great patron and supporter of her. He did the wonderful Winnie the Pooh illustrations, Wind in the Willows, books like that. Phenomenal economy of line. A great book illustrator. Tolkien, of course, you could argue is the most significant literary figure of the 20th century. If you think of the impact of fantasy fiction, I don't insist on it, but he's obviously a major figure. 250 million copies of his books. She got on with him well. C.S. Lewis was two-faced with Pauline Baynes. To her face, he always spoke nicely and said how well she was doing. Behind her back, he was only critical. He said she couldn't draw lions, she needed to study anatomy. Had she studied a little more, she might have made a fine artist. And she didn't really like C.S. Lewis because she didn't like his theology. She was a Christian. She produced stained glass windows in Dockenfield Church of the Good Shepherd, actually. She was a devout Christian, but she liked the kind of robust Christianity of Tolkien with emphasis on what you do rather than what you think. Now, she didn't like C.S. Lewis's theology. So, here comes your telling connection, and then I've only got a couple of slides, so we'll be out in 10 minutes. Okay? Be very good in this hop. Now, I might not have shown this had I met Alberto before, but it's a beautiful little film. I hope the sound works, and you will be able to see the Alberto Ceccatelli collection. Ceccatelli.
Ceccatelli.
I just preceded with this Italian article in a newspaper celebrating the visit of the curator of Farnham Museum. This was Josh Godfrey, who went to visit Alberto. I think the idea was there should be an exhibition arising out of that, and I am very, very grateful to Ian Lynch, if Ian is here, for having brought that about. Okay, here comes the film, produced by, I think, Alberto, or featuring Alberto's grandson, one of his grandsons.
Hello, we're in Tuscany, in the city of Prato. At the same time, we are in a world which is really close to the ones created by Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, and Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. You may wonder how is that possible, but if you follow me in this short journey, you will understand. Do you see that child on the left? It's me, Andrea, sitting with my cousin Rebecca and my sister Camilla. And this old lady, red dressed, on the right, she's Pauline Baynes, a woman regarded as one of the most important illustrators of the last century. In this room of my grandparents' house, we are inside the Ceccatelli collection, and here we can really understand how that old lady is the connection ring of our story. Besides being a world-famous illustrator, Pauline Baynes was married to Prince Gush, the father of my grandmother Cali. And it was in search of Fritz that Alberto, my grandfather, came to know Pauline. It was after the fall of the Berlin Wall, following more than 20 years of research. In view of Pauline's work, my grandfather managed to put together one of the largest existing collections of her artwork. A part of these items is displayed in this room, together with some other references that make this collection extremely special. For example, we have some of our personal items and a touching correspondence of almost 100 letters with my family. Of these things, many have been hand-signed by Pauline herself, often with touching dedications. You will see the wonderful maps of the Middle Earth, illustrated by Pauline for Tolkien, and also made public by the president of the German Tolkien Society. Then, you notice the poster of Bilbo's Last Song, from which a musical album was made in France. Speaking of maps, you'll see the map of Narnia too, also made by Pauline and used by the French National Library for one of their studies about the fantasy genre. Then, you can discover the Priscilla Rose, a special flower that connects so many events in this great story. I invite you to learn more about the Priscilla Rose and all the other exhibits by visiting the American Virtual Museum www.paulinebaynes.com and also the website www.paulinebaynesgush.com. I would like to thank you for following me in this little journey, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you soon for new developments in this story that started so long ago and is still not finished.
Right, I have 2 slides left, and then it's all over. First of all, this is an Ordnance Survey map, modern this time, from West End Lane, if you know Frenchmen. West End Lane, this is Broomfields up here. This is Alice Holt Forest, by the way, to the left. And then down here is Rock Farm Cottage. And you can do a pilgrimage, as I have done. It's about 3 miles from Broomfields. This rather splendid house. And then, look, very clever, it took me hours to do this. nearly as long as it took to walk, actually. And there we are, we get down to Rock Barn Cottage. And I'm sad to say that that's, well, not sad to say, but that's nothing like it was when Pauline was there. Randolph Caldecott, highly successful, utterly charming, glorious man, a real talent, an artist, died at the age of 40. Pauline Baynes, this supremely talented illustrator with an unbelievable patience and this gem-like quality. He, very successful, Pauline, little known, and she used to remark, ironically, she was not very worldly when she signed contracts, she was paid £100 per Narnia book, £700 in total. And as she pointed out, somewhat ironically, a first edition of any one of those books cost more than she received for illustrating it. Now, my last slide. Caldecott's death gave rise to a national outpouring of grief. He was someone who was universally loved, and the sense of loss was intensified by the thought of what might have been. He was like an artistic Schubert, a book illustrator Schubert. But so much was he respected that they erected a memorial to Randolph Caldecott in St. Paul's Cathedral. And this is the beautiful work by Sir Alfred Gilbert commemorating Randolph Caldecott, and I'm told that it's probably the most popular monument in St. Paul's Cathedral. People don't bother with the Nelson Monument, Duke of Wellington, who we see, but they see this beautiful little child. And then the Americans so respected Caldecott that they created the Caldecott Medal, which is, I think, one of the most prestigious medals given to the best book illustrator of the year. And if you go onto Wikipedia, you'll find an enormous amount about the Caldecott medal. And so it just occurs to me, just on my bully pulpit here, I'm saying this, just occurs to me, if Randolph Caldecott can be given a monument in St. Paul's Cathedral, Pauline Baynes deserves a little plaque on the side of the Sainsbury's supermarket.
As ever, Roy, absolutely fantastic talk. I sense a publication coming out very, very soon.
He's got one!
So, yes, I think it's brilliant to have Roy, Alberto and Massimo here today. Can't let this go without Alberto and Massimo coming to the front and just giving